temper tantrums. Are some of you thinking, this does not apply to me? Well, that very well may be, but you know, everywhere I go and tell someone about what my book is about, they almost always start telling me who they know that needs my book. And that's even before I tell them that my methods work for angry people of all ages. Did you catch that? You can use that on your husbands. You can use this method on your wives, and they will appreciate it. I think almost everyone knows someone who is anger challenged. It's very common. What I'm going to tell you today, you're not going to hear anywhere else, because my method is totally unique. My method works to totally eliminate and totally prevent tantrums. And that's why my subtitle is The Tantrum Book to End All Tantrums. I mean that seriously. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me to start. My first 5 children all threw temper tantrums, and my last 8 didn't. Yes, there's a story in there, but before I tell it to you, I think I'll answer a few of the questions that probably popped into some of your heads. And yes, I know the questions by heart. Yes, I really did actually have 13 children. Yes, which I physically gave birth to. Yes, from my very own birth canal. Yes, on purpose. No twins or triplets. My children averaged 22 months apart. Hang on. No, I did not possess extraordinary patience, because patience is not multiplied by how many children you have, it's divided by how many children you have. My youngest child is 22, my oldest is 45, and no, I can't name all of my grandchildren without a cheat sheet for the youngest ones. But then I was challenged with just getting my 13 kids' names right all the time as they were growing up. And lastly, my 50th grandchild and my first great-grandchild are in the works. If there's anything else anyone's dying to have answered, there will be a short Q&A after the presentation. Most tantrum studies have been conducted in the last 10 years or so. One study in particular by the University of Wisconsin discovered that 97% of children throw tantrums. And investigators have been studying the 97%, trying to learn more about tantrums. Seems to me they should be studying the 9%. 9% of children do not throw tantrums. So tantrums are not as universal as we've been led to believe. And I'm part of the 9%, here to tell the 91% how it's done. It's not complicated, it's common sense, as you'll see. So my 5th baby, at 14 months old, was throwing tantrums. Another mom told me something about tantrums, which gave me an idea, which led to me figuring out the secret to preventing and eliminating tantrums. I'll promise I'll tell you that secret. I applied it to my baby's tantrums, and they disappeared within about a week. When that happened, I immediately knew 3 things. 1, that the tantrum advice I had been following for years was faulty, and namely that tantrums are, all children throw tantrums. It's part of their natural development, and they would say that you should ignore tantrums. 2, the second thing I knew immediately was that my future children would be tantrum-free. And the third thing I knew was that I would be writing this book for other parents to help them get the picture that the tantrum advice out there was faulty, and so that they could opt into the tantrum-free lifestyle as well. I had 8 more children in the next 15 years. I know, it's mind-boggling for me too. But I used the same tantrum technique on my next 8 children from birth on, and not one of them ever threw a tantrum, which bolstered my commitment to write this book. Throughout my parenting career, all those years, I had an incessant, daily compulsion to learn as much as I could, as fast as I could, especially about parenting. Every time I researched and tried out a new parenting technique or method, over and above doing it for myself, I was consciously doing it for my book, for helping other parents as well. After a number of years of parenting, I figured out that there are 2 kinds of temper tantrums. I bet you didn't know that. Don't feel bad if you didn't, because most parenting experts don't know that either. A type 1 temper tantrum is simply escalated anger or anger out of control. For example, a newborn baby that wakes up and doesn't get tended to immediately will almost always just fly into a raging type 1 temper tantrum. A type 2 tantrum is anger plus an element of deliberate manipulation. And they don't start happening for children till usually around 2, when the child is capable of manipulating. An example is when a child wants something and the parent says no, and then the child throws a tantrum to try to change the parent's mind. And that's what most people think of as tantrums. And adults can throw type 2 tantrums as well. I'm sure all of you have seen some of those. And adults can throw type 1 tantrums. The type 1 tantrums of babies that are under 6 months old are not usually understood by anybody as a tantrum, because the parenting development experts have told us for decades that babies cannot experience real anger, but they can. And the tantrums, the type 1 tantrums of children 6 months old and older, those are understood by the moms and dads as tantrums. But the parenting experts, they finally recognize the tantrums of children at about the age of 18 months. Now, some people have the opposite difficulty with type 1 tantrum recognition, as in the merest hint of anger from any celebrity is almost instantly recognized by the media as a tantrum. So infants can't get proper recognition for their type 1 tantrums, and celebrities get over-recognized. Because there are 2 types of tantrums, there are 2 causes and 2 cures. And I can call these cures or secrets. I can call them secrets because the general parenting advice community doesn't know about them and teach parents about them. They don't know the potential. Let me introduce you to the first secret by helping you imagine yourself angry. I want you to envision that on your way to work, you get hit by a texting driver, and your brand new car that you're going to take on your vacation the next day is badly damaged. So you arrive at work late for an important meeting, and you are royally ticked. How do you want your coworkers to respond to your anger story? Certainly not by ignoring you, and not by giving you minimal responses. What you want for, I would say, at least a couple of days is you want your coworkers, your friends, your family, maybe even a few strangers that you happen to vent to, you want them to give you a healthy dose of empathy. You want to hear things like, "I'm so sorry you've had this happen to you. This is horrible." What can I do to help? Can I give you a hug? Can I offer you my cheesecake? You certainly need it more than I do. Everyone, even little babies, need and want empathy for their anger. I'm going to model for you what it sounds like to give empathy to an angry, crying 3-year-old who's trained, who's conditioned to come to get empathy when he's angry. You sound mad, Tyler. Are you mad? What happened? Kevin took my truck. Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That's not fun. Nope. Boy, oh boy, sometimes it sure is tough having a big brother, isn't it? Yeah, that's just a little bit of it. Now I'm going to model for you what it sounds like to give empathy to a screaming infant that's woke up, a newborn that didn't get tended to right away, and she's screaming to be fed. Here it is. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I didn't hear you. Poor baby mad. Okay, honey, it's coming. I'm going to feed you. Poor baby, I'm so sorry. Poor baby mad. It's coming. Hang on. Poor baby. Now, we all know that newborns can't understand our words of empathy, but they can understand from the tone of voice that you're giving them empathy. It is possible. And the empathy makes their anger go away. But the absolutely wonderful thing that always meeting babies' anger needs this way, from birth on, is that they learn 3 things. 1, they learn to trust that you know when they're angry, which they don't if you're ignoring it. They don't know that you know. 2, they trust that you care about them when they're angry. And because of that trust, they learn to escalate slowly in their anger while they're waiting for you patiently to meet their anger needs. They know it's going to happen after just a few times, and they become predisposed to never, ever throw a tantrum. They don't need to because you're giving them what they need. And they know also that you're getting their needs ready to be met because you've taught them that. And kids that have already been throwing type 1 tantrums, like my 5th child, when you start meeting their anger needs, their tantrums go away. They don't need to do them anymore. Georgia Haynes, one of my very, very first tantrum seminar attendees, like other commenters as well, said, my grandson's temper tantrums went away within 2 weeks of attending your seminar. It works. The typical tantrum literature does not recognize this universal need for empathy for anger. The tantrum literature is wrong-headed and misguided in 3 ways. 1, it says the cause of tantrums is children's low tolerance for frustration, for things like tiredness and hunger, their inability to express themselves with words, their lack of problem-solving skills, their lack of other ways to get out their emotions, their need for attention, and their determination to get their own way. 2, the literature says that tantrums are a normal part of child development. And 3, the literature teaches parents to ignore the tantrums, to tame the tantrums, to watch for tantrum triggers and try to minimize the tantrums, and hang in there till the tantrums eventually just go away on their own. I'm here to say those are not the causes of temper tantrums. Children do not throw them because that's the normal part of their how they develop. And 3, there's no such thing as a tantrum trigger. There are only pre-tantrum anger triggers. And if you give them empathy before it gets to the tantrum stage, there will not be a tantrum, so it can't be a tantrum trigger. And also, ignoring tantrums is part of what causes them, because they know you don't know they're angry, so they just keep trying to let you know that they're angry. Other 9% parents would agree with me because they themselves are living proof that the tantrum literature is all wrong. If you ask most 9% parents why they think other people's kids throw tantrums, they would most likely say something like, because they can. I say the same thing basically, just in a different way. The cause of type 2 tantrums is a combination of the lack of empathy for the initial anger, plus the parent not being adequately or consistently in charge of the child. And by being in charge, I mean being the one or the ones who are responsible, running the show, taking charge, directing, managing, in authority, in command, all of that. I didn't personally have any trouble being in charge of my children, so none of them threw type 2 tantrums. So you could ask, well, how do I know that that's the cure then, being in charge? Well, 3 things. I've analyzed hundreds of public tantrums on purpose, trying to prepare myself. I've been coaching parents for many years, helping them learn how to be in charge of their children and stop them from throwing temper tantrums. And I've observed over the years that not only do many, many parents of young children not seem to know how to be in charge, more and more they don't seem to know that they even should be in charge of their children. I devote a lot of my book to helping people learn how to be in charge of their children and in helping exceptionally in charge, challenged parents. I'm part of the 9% of parents who successfully prevented tantrums in their own children, and I'm here to mentor the 91%. And my number one mentor golden nugget is don't buy into the do-nothing approach to tantrums. Do something. Give empathy for the initial anger from beginning to end. Why do you suppose none of the other 9% parents have written a book similar to mine? Well, I have 3 guesses. They probably didn't do what I did. They probably succeeded in preventing tantrums with all of the children they had, which may have only been a few, but still they didn't have tantrum failures like I had to compare to later tantrum successes. So 2, they may not have understood exactly what it is they did different than the 91%, like I did. Or 3, perhaps they had 0 interest in writing a book. Not everybody does want to. I actually kind of feel obligated to put this total tantrum information out there for other parents to benefit from, and to push it until it becomes a parenting classic. It's part of my worldview. I feel like if you share something of value that you've learned, then it seems like you're helping the world be a better place, or at least you're trying to. There's so much potential here. Tantrums wiped off the face of the earth, reduction in postpartum depression, fewer angry school shooters. Who knows? Who knows? I think there's so much potential, and I feel like I really need to help get this out there. Chances are you all know someone who's struggling with temper tantrums. This book will give them their best opportunity to end their tantrum troubles. I hope you will buy this book for someone you love. I'm going to leave you with a few non-tantrum tidbits. Consistency in parenting is highly overrated. Parents are continually admonished to be consistent in virtually everything parental. And there are 3 places that it matters: being respectful, loving, and firmly in charge of your children. But much of the rest can be somewhat flexible. In fact, less than 100% consistency is crucial if you want to raise children that are spontaneous and can cope with change, and who can make their way into the house late at night from the car without squalling like it's the end of the world. Another thing, as soon as a baby is capable of making talking noises, which is about the age of 4 months typically, you can actually teach most babies to learn how to be quiet in public. All you have to do is put a finger to your lips and one to theirs, and very quietly and lovingly say, every time they make any noise in a place where you want them to learn to be quiet. And by the time they're 6 months, 8 months, a year, they know where to, they can make this much noise or that much noise, everything. You can teach them to be absolutely quiet in a library. Absolutely. But of course you have to meet their needs. If they're hungry, you can't let them squat. I'm going to leave you with one final anecdote. Before I had my first teenager, another mom told me, teenagers are the most ungrateful people on the face of the planet. And that scared me. So I tried to figure out a way to prevent that in my home. I hatched a plan. I decided, in general, to not do for my children what they were capable of doing for themselves. And the result, besides my children saying they grew up feeling very confident and very capable, countless times my children thanked me profusely for mending a shirt or finding a lost textbook or something else that most kids would take for granted. In fact, my kids thanked me so profusely it was often embarrassing. I was glad many times that no one else besides my family could hear that excessive gratitude, because they might falsely think that I rarely did anything for my kids. Well, maybe in the case of mending it wouldn't have been so false. But I would like to thank you again for being here. I hope you feel rewarded for your time. I'd like to thank Book Expo for having me here. This has been a pleasure. The second edition of my book is due out around the middle of June. MegaMom's Wisdom for Tantrums, the Tantrum book to end all tantrums. It's going to be in bookstores online, including barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com. And won't you tell someone you love about my book, please? And anyone who would like me to sign their book, I'd be happy to do that. Well, and now we're going to have time for Q&A if anyone's interested. No? Okay.
How do you respond to a child that we're just learning this information? So you're just learning this information, okay. So the child might be 6 or even 5, and they're acting out. So now what do you do?
Right. Well, the very first thing to do, with a 6-year-old, you can actually have a conversation and say, things are going to change. I'm going to make things better for you and better for me. And these are the ways I'm going to change things. For instance, you might, after reading my book, you might think timeouts are not going to be the standard anymore if they've been. And you explain, from now on, we're going to do fitting consequences. In other words, if you do this, this will be the consequence. And if you do this, this will be the consequence. We're not going to time out. So, I highly recommend timeouts are not used because they're not a very good discipline system. I give many reasons. But also, what you would try to do before there's ever another tantrum is change the dynamics and be more in charge. And I give many hints at how to go about that in the book. And so you want to change the dynamics so that the child, A, knows there's something different, and really all it is the child knowing that isn't going to be tolerated anymore or necessary, because if they're getting their anger needs met, and even with type 2 children, who even if they have faked anger, and it's not even real anger, they're just faking it, there's still a benefit to giving empathy, as long as they're not violent or aggressive with their anger. If they're just, doing a tantrum, you can give empathy even before it really ramps up, and that may be enough. But you need to change the dynamics. Did you have a question?
Within a public library setting, if you see other children having temper tantrums, what's the best thing for you to do? Stay out of it or try to help? I have a 2-year-old myself, and sometimes I'm just like, let me do my own thing.
It's hard for me. I have the answer, and I can't walk up to somebody and say, hey, I know how you can fix that. But I am going to print up and sell to people little cards that they can hand out to parents and just say, would you like this card that can help you? And they may or may not say, but then it's not so embarrassing for people. There's a time, it can be done, you just have to think it out ahead of time. For instance, I was at the Dallas airport, and they had a play area near where I had to stand for hours, and I have, my ears hurt if I have high-pitched noises around me. And this little girl, about 3 or 4, was shrieking. I mean, and it was annoying me, and I know it was annoying other people around me. And what I did was I walked up to the dad and I said, would you be okay if I talk to your daughter for a minute? I didn't even tell him what about. Sometimes I do, but he said, yeah. So I walked up to the child and I said, when you scream at play, it hurts my ears when I'm near you. Would you mind not screaming, please? And I said, what's nice is to laugh when you play. That's a funner thing. And there was no more screaming. Not one bit. But it's hard. You have a child on an airplane shrieking and throwing a tantrum, and I don't approach people myself, and I know I have the answer, but I don't. But these cards that I want to get ready for people to buy, they can have some in their purse all the time or whatever, hand them out to people. That's a nice approach. I haven't written them yet, but.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just curious as to when you're trying to have a parent learn your process, and like you say that sometimes it's a week or sometimes it's 2 weeks. Is there something to say to that parent that is like tried it once, and it's like, what do you expect to see until
I didn't hear that last bit, sorry.
Like with a new parent and they want to try your process out. And you say it takes a week or 2 before the child starts to actually change. And
that's with type 1 tantrums.
For
type 2
how long?
Depends on the situation, how long that's going to take.
With type 1, if you're able to kind of remedy type 1, is it less likely that type 2 will ever happen? Or does type 2 still happen? You have to be prepared for that.
There's 2 causes. For type 2, even if you eliminate type 1 tantrums by being empathetic, if you continue being empathetic, the child is going to be less likely to get into doing type 2. But if you're also not in charge of your child,
yeah, I know.
It takes the 2 parts to prevent type 2.
I think it's important that people give the book to other people, because new parents are so really they're like almost afraid to admit they don't know anything. And I like the way in your book that you wrote out, it's very friendly and warm. So I think it's a great gift.
Okay. Actually, let me make a correction. Before I knew to give empathy to my children, I still never had type 2 tantrums. So just being in charge stops type 2 tantrums. But it's obviously better for the children if you're giving them what everybody needs for a tantrum or for anger. That's everything? Okay, thank you.